I want to begin by noting that this hearing is set against the backdrop this week of Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, convening the first ever State Department ministerial to advance international religious freedom, an event which has brought together senior representatives from more than 70 governments around the world to discuss areas of collaboration and partnership in the cause of religious freedom globally. Secretary Pompeo penned an opinion piece in the USA Today earlier this week, highlighting the ministerial and the importance of advancing religious freedom globally. Of note, he specifically mentioned Ms. Gulchera and family. While the Chinese government and the Communist Party are equal opportunity oppressors, targeting unregistered and registered Christians, Tibetan, Buddhists, Falun Gong practitioners, and others with harassment, detention, imprisonment, and more, the current human rights crisis unfolding in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region targeting Muslim minority groups is arguably among the worst, if not the most severe instances in the world today of an authoritarian government brutally and systematically targeting a minority faith community. This is an issue which the Commission has been dealing with for some time. In April, we wrote U.S. Ambassador to China Terry Branstad urging him to prioritize this crackdown in his interactions with the Chinese government and that he begin collecting information to make the case for possible application of global Magnitsky sanctions against senior government and party officials in the region, including Cheng Chuan-Guo, the current Xinjiang Communist Party secretary. The Commission's forthcoming annual report, set to be released this October, will prominently feature the grave and deteriorating situation we will cover here today. While our expert witnesses will discuss the situation in greater detail, I want to take a few minutes to paint a picture of life in Xinjiang. For months now, there have been credible estimates of between 800,000 to 1 million people from this region being held at political re-education centers or camps, which are fortified with barbed wire, bomb-proof surfaces, reinforced doors, and guard rooms. Security personnel at these facilities, at these camps, have subjected detainees to torture, to medical neglect and maltreatment, to solitary confinement, to sleep deprivation, to lack of adequate clothing and cold temperatures, and other forms of abuse resulting in the death of some of these detainees. According to one news source, the internment program aims to rewire the political thinking of detainees, erase their Islamic beliefs, and reshape their very identities. The camps have expanded rapidly over the past year with almost no judicial process or legal paperwork. Detainees who most vigorously criticize the people and things they love are rewarded, and those who refuse to do so are punished with solitary confinement, with beatings, and food deprivation. That was a quote from the media coverage of this, end quote. Some local officials in the region have used chilling political rhetoric to describe the very purpose of the arbitrary detentions of Uyghur Muslims and members of other Muslim ethnic minority groups. These are the terms they've used: eradicating tumors, or spraying chemicals on crops to, quote, kill the weeds. One expert who was testifying today described Uyghur Xinjiang as a police state to rival North Korea, with a formalized racism on the order of South African apartheid. While the Chinese government has repeatedly denied knowledge of the camps, a groundbreaking report by Adrian Zenz, a scholar at the European School of Culture and Theology, published through the Jamestown Foundation in May, found that Chinese authorities were soliciting public bids for the construction of additional camps and the addition of security elements to existing facilities. I'd submit this report for the record and would also note the Google Earth footage behind me, which clearly, that's the Google Earth, that's the picture, right? And that Google Earth footage behind me clearly shows the construction of these camps over the span of several months. Those not subject to transformation through education, as they call it, in these detention facilities still face daily intrusions in their home life. This includes compulsory, quote-unquote, homestays, whereby Communist Party officials and government workers are sent to live with local Uyghur and Kazakh families. The data-driven surveillance in Xinjiang is assisted by iris and body scanners, voice pattern analyzers, DNA sequencers, and facial recognition cameras in neighborhoods, on roads, or in train stations. Two large Chinese firms, Hikvision and Dahua Technology, have profited greatly from the surge in security spending, reportedly winning upwards of $1.2 billion in Chinese government contracts for large-scale surveillance projects. Authorities employ handheld devices to search smartphones for encrypted chat apps and require residents to install monitoring applications on their cell phones. More traditional security measures are also employed. That includes extensive police checkpoints. The rise in security personnel is also accompanied by the proliferation of convenience police stations. That's also within quotes, convenience police stations. A dense network of street corner, village, or neighborhood police stations that enhance authorities' ability to closely surveil and police local communities. Just this month, reports emerged of officials in a humiliating public act, cutting the skirts and even long shirts of Uyghur women on the spot as they walked through local streets. They did so as a means of enforcing a ban on ethnic minorities wearing long skirts. And yesterday, there was an analysis released by the NGO Chinese Human Rights Defenders indicating that 21% of arrests in China last year were in Xinjiang, which is only 1.5% of the population. 21% of the arrests last year in all of China concentrated in an area with 1.5% of the population. The number of arrests increased 731% over the previous year, and that does not include the detentions of those in the quote-unquote political re-education centers, which are carried out extra-legally. Radio Free Asia has led the way in reporting on the crisis, and that has not come without a cost. Developments in Xinjiang have had a direct impact on U.S. interests, most notably the detention of dozens of family members of U.S.-based Uyghur journalists employed by Radio Free Asia, as well as the detention of dozens of family members of prominent Uyghur rights activist Rubio Kadir in an apparent attempt by the Chinese government to silence effective reporting and rights advocacy. We are delighted that RFA journalist Gulchehra Oja is able to join us today to speak to her personal experience in this regard. The Commission has convened a series of hearings focused on the long arm of China, and that dimension certainly exists as it relates to the Uyghur diaspora community, including right here in the United States.